People wonder why young men gave the middle finger to the left. And I'm thinking, you've spent the last decade trying to program like a robot every single person under the age of 45 to think men evil, eat all men. And now you're surprised that the next group of young men is saying, Every young group of people throughout history always has one thing in common. They want to rebel against the people who came before them. Throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s, you think of the hippie movement and rock and roll and covering your body in tattoos and sticking it to the man. Now, to be a modern rebel, it's to want to get married. This last year, Bible sales are up 22% in the United States. There are more young people converting to Christianity now than at any other time in modern history. It's up to young people now, because no one else is going to do this, to take back our country and to redefine the American dream.
Isabel Brown, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
This is fun. I don't think I've ever done a podcast with someone while pregnant who was also pregnant.
I know. I'm sure we're going to have a lot to bond over and talk about today, but I feel like everybody's having babies this year, which is so fun.
I think so. Last year kind of felt like that too, but it's really fun. Is this your first baby?
It is, yep. As we're recording right now, I'm about 24 weeks pregnant, which has been so fun and so exciting and a beautiful journey.
Has it been hard?
Yeah. I told my friend last night, we went out to dinner and she said, okay, be honest, what's pregnancy actually like? I think a lot of it has been surprising, which took me a little bit by surprise because I was pre-med in college. I studied the science behind this more times than I can count. And I do a whole lot of work in the pro-life advocacy space. So I know a whole lot about pregnancy, but it's impossible really to prepare for it until you experience it yourself. So many symptoms that are very commonplace, nobody talks about. And so that can be surprising facing those for the first time. But I think the most beautiful parts have been the things that you can't explain to anyone else, like feeling your baby kick inside of you for the first time and what it's like to hear their heartbeat on an ultrasound for the first time. It is truly, truly magical. And for all of the hard, difficult, frustrating parts of it, honestly, that's only made the experience way more rewarding because you learn so much about the self-sacrifice to give someone else a chance at life.
That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
You're coming at this from a much healthier angle than me. I had a baby like a year ago. And I was like, oh, as soon as you have a baby, you're like, oh, we should have more.
Of course.
They're so cute. And then I was like, okay, this is a bit soon. I'm very excited and thrilled. And it's been like way easier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Easier than last time too.
Every pregnancy, they say, is different that way. What changed for you?
I've gotten healthier and healthier. So I'm inclined to think it's just getting my health, like improving my health over the subsequent years. I think it's mostly that.
Yeah.
Like I'm even doing better. When I had my baby last year, I was really sick from living in Miami and in mold, like really sick. And I got out of mold and like instantly got pregnant. Was like, well, I guess I'm feeling better.
Wow.
And so I think some of my pregnancy symptoms were because of that. So this is way easier, but I'm still like kind of whiny about it.
Yeah, that's okay. You're entitled to be a little whiny.
That might be part of the problem too. And I'm in like a good relationship. So I'm just like, I don't want to do that. What are you doing? I'm making a baby and I'm tired.
The number of times I've said to my husband, guess what I did all day?
Yeah.
Made your child so you can fill up my water bottle for the 20th time.
Okay. But like, it's also exhausting.
It is. Oh my gosh. It's so much to take on. And it's definitely stretching me in so many different ways, literally, but also emotionally and spiritually. I think it's just been a very powerful experience. And I'm really excited to meet her officially when she gets here.
Oh, girl too. Yeah.
A girl, yeah.
Me too.
Oh, so exciting.
That's so fun. Okay. Religion. Let's do that for a little bit.
Yeah.
Did you grow up with faith?
I did.
Is that kind of baked into your family so you knew it from a young age?
It was, yeah. I was raised in the Catholic Church really from the time I was baptized as an infant. Off and on went to Catholic schools and non-religious schools growing up, but went to a Catholic high school where faith was a huge component of our religious education and upbringing. And by the time I got to college, my faith was really important to me. It always has been throughout my adolescence and young adult years, but I didn't have a great experience when it came to the campus ministry group at my university, especially because I was so plugged into the political movement that I was leading on my college campus. And a lot of people didn't like that in terms of our church community and saying it was too distracting to my faith and I was a bad Catholic for getting involved in politics on the secular side of things. So I spent a few years kind of exploring everything when it came to Christianity. I had never attended a non-denominational church. I'd never really explored Protestantism and spent a few years kind of dabbling across the space, but really came home with an absolute love and passion and fervor for the Catholic faith a few years ago. And actually, I'm so in love with it now because this last year, my husband decided to join the church. So walked with him through the RCIA process, which is when you convert to the church as an adult, because he asked me to be his sponsor. And throughout that journey was really falling in love with confronting the big questions about Catholicism and the last 2,000 years of church history through fresh eyes because of his perspective. And he was asking me questions about the Eucharist and Mary and the early church fathers. And I knew the answers to those things at the baseline level, at least. But I was really craving a depth of knowledge in terms of studied academia when it comes to theology that I didn't have. So in May, just started a theology master's program at Notre Dame, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, which has been fantastic, and I love it.
That's very cool. Okay, is that an online program? Or
It is, yeah. I knew obviously I couldn't move back to a college campus and go back to school full time. So it took a long time.
Good point, yeah.
Nor did I want to, really, let's be honest. But it took a long time finding the right program for me. But I knew I could theoretically go find all of this knowledge on my own by self-research and independent study. But it was nice to have access to experts who knew things a lot better than I did and could point me in the right direction. Spent many, many months looking for the right program, and it is totally online. You can do a hybrid residential option as well, but the whole program is really created to make Catholic leaders out of people who don't work for the church. So these are people out in the world, lay people, as we would call them in church terminology, who are lawyers and doctors and teachers and content creators like me and so many other people, really diving into their faith and falling in love with it from a whole new perspective.
If you guys aren't on Peterson Academy, you're missing out. There are over 25 8-hour courses on there from people like Vervaeke, Michael Malice, Keith Campbell. My dad has 3 8-hour courses out now, including Nietzsche, Sermon on the Mount, and Intro to Personality, which is excellent. Brian Keating's on there. David Eagleman on brain plasticity just came out, which I love. Go to petersonacademy.com and come in and see what it's like. We have a 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can poke around the website, look at the courses, and get a refund if you want, no strings attached. Any age is welcome. The courses are university level. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. So for anyone who isn't familiar with you, can you give a brief background about who you are and what it is you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, never thought I would be doing this as a job. Never dreamed of working in media or certainly in politics. Ultimately, my dream growing up was to become a physician. And I started college with a degree in biomedical sciences at Colorado State University, where I grew up in the state of Colorado. Love science, will always be a scientist at heart when it comes to how I approach issues, but learned really, really quickly that even at my traditionally pretty conservative agriculture-based school in Colorado, the pursuit of objective truth was not really a part of my science curriculum. In classes like anatomy and physiology and eukaryotic cellular biology, we weren't really talking about scientific fact. More often than not, we were confronting my professor's political opinions learning the crazy twisted version of science I think COVID explained to the entire world in the last few years, where we would be taught about every step of fetal development, for example, for months and months and months, and then be taught by our professor, well, abortion doesn't actually end a genetically unique human life. Or, hey, I know we told you that there's 2 sets of chromosomes and that really determines biological sex, but your gender can just be something different if you want to change it on any given week.
Were you learning that in your science courses?
I was, yeah.
What year was this?
I started college in 2015 and graduated in 2019. Okay. So it was right at the height of Trump coming into power the first time. Wow. Antifa was on the rise for the first time. And what I really found was a total intolerance toward not just a conservative political viewpoint on my campus, but a religious one as well. Actually, in a class, I had to choose the wrong answer choice in order to stand up for my faith on a multiple choice exam. They said it was impossible that God could have created the universe. And essentially you had to say everything spontaneously erupted from a single cell. We don't really have a bigger explanation.
In a biology course?
In a biology course. Yeah. So that was shocking to me. And obviously I wanted to do something about it. I've never been one to sit down and shut up in the midst of extreme injustice towards just a difference of opinion, really. It wasn't this whole crusade necessarily I intended to start on my campus, but to protect people's right to think differently and question things and interact with ideas that are different from our own, which is what academia is supposed to be all about. Long story short, ended up getting very involved in the campus political movement right as that was becoming mainstream with groups like Turning Point USA. Had a bunch of great speakers come speak on my campus like Charlie Kirk and Dennis Prager right when that was becoming a brand new idea, and fell in love with activism and advocacy. And I knew I wanted to take that with me after graduation. So started posting on social media in 2019 through graduate school, where I kept learning about health policy and science. And now I've really grown to leaps and bounds I never ever could have imagined as a creator.
And you have a book?
I do, yeah. I've published 2 books in the process. This has been a long story, so bear with me, but published 2 books in the process. One about the college experience from a conservative student perspective right after I graduated. That came out in 2021, and just had a book released in March making the case for how Gen Z is the generation that's going to save America and become the most conservative one we've seen in a long time. I was literally laughed off set at Fox News and Newsmax and pretty much every radio station in the country when the book came out in March. And I love going back now and saying, see, we told you so, because this last election was so overwhelmingly driven by young people. I have a podcast where we talk about all kinds of stuff: dating, religion, politics, what's trending on TikTok, and pretty much everything else. And it's just been the journey of a lifetime to see where God has led me in the most unexpected of ways.
That was great. Okay, there's a bunch of things I want to get into. I went to university for biomedical science too.
Love.
I was in Canada. I didn't finish my degree. I actually stopped because I learned a ton and I absolutely loved it, but there were parts of the curriculum I didn't agree with. It didn't sound as bad as yours. Yeah. This was in I think I was in that program 2013, 2014, part of 2015. I didn't have any overt questions. They were just starting to sneak in. Like, people would come into the class and be like, oh, I know if you're in this, like physics, for example, if you're in the physics class and you're female, I know it was a lot harder for you to get here. And it was just that kind of thing. And I was like, why was it harder? Like, am I stupid? Like, what exactly are you saying? It was just little bits, but my science classes hadn't really been infected. History had. Yeah. So history was woke, but I guess at that time in Canada anyway, the sciences were still okay, which was like a breath of fresh air, because I came from psychology in Montreal, which was just, oh my gosh, what a mess. But anyway, so you said you went to a Catholic high school, that's what you said, but also regular high school?
Regular middle school, and partly elementary school. We moved around a lot.
I was just talking to my husband about this, because I was like, what was the difference in regards to like how dating was perceived and marriage and all these things? And he went to a Christian high school. And was like, what was that like? Was like, if somebody slept with somebody else, was it like, God doesn't want that for you? Like, was that kind of like the overarching feeling from other people, or was it just the same as public school? Which
I think it depends on who you would ask, to be honest, and which friend group somebody was a part of or something like that. We had a pretty big religious presence on my high school campus, where we would take religious ed classes mandatorily as part of our curriculum. Depending on the year, that might look like church history. We had a morality class my junior year where we talked a lot about stuff like this, and we would regularly do retreats with our school. That was a huge part of my spiritual formation growing up. Most people who go to Catholic high school in the United States do a retreat their junior year called Kairos, which quite literally just means God's time. And it is an incredible 4-day experience that many, many, many thousands of people in our country absolutely love and look back on. Basically, it's like the transition of accepting your faith into your grown-up years. And what does that actually mean to live your faith for yourself and not just do this because your family wants to bring you on Sunday mornings. That was really, really impactful for me. But in terms of personal values or decisions and some degeneracy, perhaps, I mean, I think every school, regardless of whether it's parochial or completely secular, probably deals with some of that. We certainly did. And what's been really interesting to me now is during my teenage years, it was almost like trendy or cool and cutting edge to say that you were rejecting the faith at our high school, because a lot of these families had 7 or 8 kids, and this was the 6th or 7th sibling to go through these schools, extremely Catholic with a capital C families. And to be cutting edge or edgy and to rebel against your family meant to call yourself an atheist as a teenager and say, I don't believe in any of this.
Yeah.
I'm now watching a lot of those people I went to high school with come back around and fall in love with their faith now as adults. And I think we're seeing that at the spiritual level for our whole country, really. Nobody could have expected that our generation would become so overwhelmingly in love with God. And yet this last year, Bible sales are up 22% in the United States. There are more young people converting to Christianity now than at any other time in modern history, and they're really craving this traditional, with a capital T, faith, Catholicism and Orthodoxy, more than anybody could have seen coming. And I think a lot of that is just because we've seen faith in America become so secularized and influenced by pop culture, where the church is doing this thing, and I say the church meaning across all denominations, but they seem to have been doing this thing for the last 10 years or so called being more seeker friendly. That's a term you might have heard. And it's not working. It's backfiring big time. You're watching pastors wearing the rainbow flag, reciting stuff like the Sparkle Creed on Sunday morning, which is a real thing, sadly.
No,
wish it wasn't.
I haven't
real
heard
thing.
of this.
Oh, it's bad. If you look it up, I believe in the non-binary God and the whole thing, which is blasphemous and insane. But you're watching people see these events unfold, or watch the BLM flag get flown outside of their church on Sunday morning, or be lectured to about their child's gender identity. And young people especially are realizing our society is miserable like this right now. Nobody's happy. We're facing the biggest mental health crisis of all time, particularly as young adults. Something is broken there with how the church has tried to become more like the world instead of the other way around. So you're seeing massive flocking back towards traditional Christianity. And Gen Z, shockingly, is the most likely demographic to seek out stuff like the traditional Latin Mass, which nobody ever could have predicted.
Wow.
But is this huge countercultural movement that I think speaks volumes as to our desire to want to return to traditionalism as a society.
Dad was just telling me that. I don't know the stats around this. Obviously I can sense it, that there's way more people open to Christianity and converting. I converted. So which I never would have thought I would have, years ago growing up in Toronto. So I can see that, but he was talking about how it is Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Those are the numbers that are growing faster than Protestantism. Is that true?
Much faster.
Wow. That, you know what? That doesn't really surprise me for a number of reasons. One, as a backlash, I know all the churches in Toronto that I grew up around, if you go back now, they all have rainbow flags outside.
Oh, yeah.
It's nuts. My parents couldn't find, my mom has one, I don't remember if it's Catholic or Orthodox. I think it's a Catholic church she goes to that she's it's fine. But it was one. All the other ones are insane. So
that honestly reminds me of what we're seeing in the UK too. Obviously, there's more political nuance from the last several thousand years there with the Anglican Church. But quite literally, a few months ago, I was in Scotland with my family. And while we were there, a headline came out from the Telegraph that the Church of England was trying to change the name to drop the word church. They wanted to call themselves the Community of England to be more open-minded.
This is
and
so
they claimed
painful.
this was for young people, right? But I'm looking around at the whole world and young people wanting real substantive faith in Christianity. And I'm thinking, who is telling you this is a good idea?
Old people.
Old people, I guess. This is the short answer.
Yeah. Oh, brutal. If you're the type of person who on occasion likes to partake in a few alcoholic beverages, but also you don't want to wreak havoc on your body and you're health conscious, you should have my hangover supplement After Party at your house, available at all times. It's made of dihydromycin, no fillers, just pure dihydromycin, which helps break down acetaldehyde, which is what ethanol, alcohol, converts into in your body that poisons you, damages your organs, damages your brain when you drink. It's not the ethanol that feels fun that's the issue exactly. It's what it breaks down into that damages your brain and organs. If you could break down that poison faster, wouldn't you? I cannot explain over an ad how well this works. So if you do try it, you can get a 30-day money-back guarantee if you buy through fullerhealth.com. You can also buy it through Amazon, super fast shipping. But if you want the money-back guarantee through Amazon, you need to email us through the website to get it. So don't take my word for it. Read the reviews, try it, fullerhealth.com or Afterparty on Amazon. Okay, UK. Have you been on X recently?
Yes, sadly. I always say, I love that Elon bought X. I love that we're breaking the news on X and people are the media now. Twitter long has been a place for me where dreams go to die. Everything is so negative and so divisive and so horrible, but I am seeing everything coming out of Europe and the UK, and it is just astounding to me, both from the free speech element and people getting thrown in prison for 20 months for posting something on Facebook, and from these grooming gangs that I'm very thankful are now coming to the surface with headlines and we're learning about this for the first time. But how is it possible that for decades and decades, they're estimating over 250,000 young girls have been raped in the United Kingdom and nothing has been done about it?
I know. I can't believe I hadn't. I feel like I might have heard about the Rotherham. Mm-hmm. I'm like too pregnant for words, really. But
Story of my life.
I feel like maybe I heard something about that, but I was like, well, horrifying, isolated incident. But to know that this has been going on for that long, and then the recent vote against looking into it from the UK government.
It's a shame.
It's like, are we going to look into this? Everyone seems upset about this. No.
Not even to prosecute people, but just to like investigate
into it,
which is asinine to me. And what's really sad is you've watched this really strong cultural shift happen in the UK over the last 6 months or so as it pertains to free speech and free expression, and particularly criticizing the government. And you have amazing people who are doing incredible work to try to expose some of this stuff that now either are in prison, number one, or number two, are so afraid that they are actually going to be prosecuted for this stuff and jailed for it that they just can't say anything. I was on a podcast a few weeks ago with Winston Marshall, who is amazing and does incredible work. And we were asking him about how bad things have gotten. And he actually had to say on this podcast, yeah, I'm in London right now. I'm not in the United States. So I actually literally can't answer that question or I'll be thrown in prison. And I remember that's exactly the face I made. I remember just sitting there thinking,
oh my gosh,
how do people live like this?
How's he even doing a podcast?
Exactly.
Doesn't he do politics?
He does, yeah. And he talks about this stuff all the time. But
what if his guest says something?
That's a little bit different, I think. But he had been given a call from someone saying, hey, you're like on a list now and you have to be aware of this stuff. When you're in the United States, it's a little easier for you to be more critical. But when you're at home, this is going to be tough moving forward. And I don't know how much worse things have to get in the UK for people to break, but you can't have a free society and expect people to live like that. They're mutually exclusive things.
That's insane. I know there was a bill, C-63, that they were trying to pass in Canada that was similar, that made it basically, if you had conservative views online, it was deemed as hate speech and then you could be thrown in prison. Basically the same thing as what's going on in the UK. And people were like, no, they wouldn't do that. And I was like, they're doing it right now in the UK. And it's Canada, which is kind of like, you know, in between America and the UK. I was like, this could have happened. I'm like, Dad, you got to get out of there. They're going to throw you in prison, I think, if this passes, which it could. Although now that everything's on pause now. So
I know, I'm so anxious to see what happens.
Yeah, it's a mess. It's not necessarily like, so Trudeau said he'd resign, then prorogued the government for 3 months, which is ridiculous and is only supposed to happen like in certain types of emergencies. But leaders have been known to like take a pause when they know they're going to get kicked out.
Yeah,
basically, and conservatives have done it too. So it's happened, but at least it paused all the bills. There were crazy bills getting pushed through that I think they're just disappearing now.
I'm not sure what they do with those now that everything's just kind of in limbo in
from the research system. I don't know either. From the research I've done online is like the bills that were getting passed through are gone now, unless someone tries to bring it up again. But I think there'll be a switch in government unless Canadians are so insane that they vote in another Liberal, which they could. I hope they don't. They might though. I think they're just doing the Biden-Harris switch, but Canada style. So like, They know Trudeau's going to lose. They're going to bring in, I mean, maybe even Chrystia Freeland or something, but like somebody switch it up. It's like just classic America 2.0.
I love that you said that, America 2.0. I've been theorizing for a while that these aren't just issues we're facing in the United States when it comes to the culture war that we've been talking about for so long, and certainly politically. And you're watching a really similar movement, albeit a few months or a few years later, start to take place in Canada and the UK and across Europe and Australia and New Zealand. We're kind of watching like a reckoning of Western civilization happen right now when it comes to who we are and what our identity is and what we want to do moving forward for the future. I have no idea what that's going to look like. And there's a lot more political hurdles and stuff like parliamentary systems than we have. It's way harder to change political leadership. But I think people everywhere are just done. They're done with wokeism. They're done with child gender transition. They're done with mass migration. They're done with the silencing of free speech. And I can't wait to see what that turns into. It's kind of an exciting time.
Oh, it's super exciting. It's super exciting to be here, like in America. Great time being here. I think 2025 is going to be interesting, although it started off it's been a little rocky for us. Everyone's like, yeah, you know, everything's, well, maybe not everyone, but everything's going to be great. And then it's just like fire and brimstone at the beginning of 2025. Yeah. So we'll see. But I think, like, I know from growing up in Canada, I could always look at style in the US and be like, that'll be popular in like a year here, and it did. And then you could see people would start wearing kind of the same clothes about a year later, and you see that in other cultures too. If you go to like Eastern Europe or something, the style will be like a number of years behind. America's usually first. There might be a place in front of America, I'm not aware of it, but I know for Canada it's like slightly behind. So when wokeism, when they were like, what's happening with BLM, like what's going on with this, it was not as far gone in Canada, but I mean, they've tried to catch up as best they can. So they're doing a bang up job, but at least Trudeau maybe is resigning now. So we'll see what happens.
Going to be a crazy few months for all of our friends up north. And that's if they don't become the 51st state, as has become our favorite meme on the internet.
Do you think he's joking?
Yeah, I do. I mean, knowing Trump, I think ultimately at this point it's become a troll. But then again, this morning, I saw a headline that Denmark had some officials reach out to the Trump administration under the table and say, hey, we might be ready to talk about Greenland now, which would be crazy. And obviously that all started as a joke. My favorite meme, by the way, was posted by the president's son, and it was just a map of Greenland, but instead of calling it Greenland, it was called Mara Igloo, which I was dying about. It was so good. So you never know, I guess, now what could be a joke and what's actually legitimate policy at this point. But I do think Canada deserves an opportunity to stand on its own 2 feet. We'll see what that turns into, and anything could happen.
I was 100% certain it was a joke, and then it's continued, and I was like, maybe he's just like testing. Like maybe he's throwing it out there and it's like, it's going to be a joke if it is a joke. And then if Canada does nothing, then it's not a joke. I don't know.
The art of the deal.
Politics in the Western world are insane recently. US politics are just, they're so entertaining. I mean, I'm glad it's gone in the direction it's gone in, but it's very entertaining. Okay, so school, you went to university. TPUSA came and spoke at your university, and did you kind of organize that?
Yeah, so at the time I was starting what they call a chapter, which is basically like a local club for your college campus. Cool. For Turning Point. This was when it was a very young baby organization. There were like 500 college campuses that were remotely involved with TPUSA, and Charlie's first ever big speaking tour. He showed up first to our university. Things were crazy at that point in time.
What year?
This was 2018, February of 2018.
Yeah, things were wild.
So nobody was really doing this campus speaking thing yet. Antifa was brand new, and there had been a handful of crazy events where people were lighting things on fire at like Berkeley when Ben Shapiro showed up occasionally, but that was it. So we decided to test the waters with this idea, and Charlie had become a wonderful mentor to me at this point, going to a few of the conferences and getting involved in the organization. And almost right away, all hell broke loose in the state of Colorado, where I lived, when he announced he was coming to our university to talk about free speech. Quite literally. That was going to be the topic of his speech, why it still mattered on college campuses. And for about a month and a half before his visit, every single day I had to meet with our campus police department and our administration, because they had gotten wind that basically all of the West had conglomerated together with all of their Antifa chapters to come and protest our event that night.
Yikes.
It ended up being truly, truly scary. At some points, the National Guard for the state of Colorado actually had to be deployed, and they had snipers on top of our computer science building and set up these huge concrete barricades so people couldn't drive a car through crowds of protesters. And meanwhile, we had almost 1,000 people show up inside to this event, which was amazing because that last year we had Bernie Sanders come speak twice, fully paid for by the university, by the way. Totally different experience when you're on the left. And a few hundred people went and there wasn't very much excitement. So there was clearly this hunger and excitement for just a difference of opinion on our campus. But outside, there were 1,000 more people screaming and shoving each other and making international news, which was just crazy to be dealing with as a 21-year-old college student at the time. But it taught me a lot about the perceived nature of conservatives at that time when it was truly radically countercultural to be outspoken about your support for Donald Trump or your support for freedom of speech, or even just the idea that not everyone has to agree on everything all the time. And there was this really extreme generational hostility I think we saw with millennials in particular, but that spurred the curiosity of Gen Z. I'm the first year of Gen Z, born in 1997. So those of us who came up after that fact, by the time I graduated college, there were tons of kids walking around with MAGA hats and wearing Donald Trump t-shirts and putting on events just like that one over and over and over again. And I think you've seen that snowball down the hill to astronomical levels now by 2024.
Wow, wild. The first time I saw a university protest was 2017 with Dad at the University of Toronto. And it wasn't thousands of people, but it was a lot of people. There were loudspeakers, and it was just like, I thought it was scary. Yeah. But I thought it was a bit entertaining.
Yeah.
Like, who are these absolute lunatics? I was like, and they're in university? Like, are they in the university?
Students, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's always fun to poke the bear. I always enjoyed that when I was a student, but you don't really see those anymore, those protests. I don't know if it's just that conservatism is normal now, which I think it is, or the left has just given up and they're not as loud anymore, but those have kind of gone by the wayside in the last few years.
It's normalized completely compared to how it was. It's crazy. I'm not used to it still.
Yeah.
After like living through that, it was like, it's okay now. Is it popular now? It's like, what is happening?
With young men, I think it is. And obviously that showed these last few weeks with the election. Well over half of young men under the age of 35 voted for Donald Trump in record numbers, which everyone said would be statistically impossible. And I think your dad and Charlie Kirk and Brandon Tatum and a lot of those people we have to thank for emboldening young men over the past few years. Young women are still catching up, and I think a lot of people in the media especially point the finger at young women in Gen Z and say they're a lost cause, they're way too far gone, the left has already taken over this generation. But even between the 2020 election and 2024, young women shifted 11 points to the Republican Party, which is insane, unheard of. No one ever could have predicted that, especially when this whole election was the women versus the men and abortion versus everything else.
Yeah.
So I do think we're getting there, but men have been under attack much longer than women in America. This is a new attack we're seeing on women. So it's just going to take some time for female voices to bring the truth back.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Do you think, so I grew up Toronto, went to University of Montreal, both very, very liberal places. All my friends were liberal when I went to university. I don't think there was a conservative there. Like, we didn't see them
probably not
at all. Do you know stats behind ages? Because we're seeing this uprising in Gen Z that's more pro-conservatism. I don't think as many people, now maybe it's changed now, my age, so I'm 33 now, were conservatives. Like, nobody was. It's actually insane. When I moved to the US, I was just like, so that's a conservative? Like, I didn't even know what they were. Or when Dad started getting called a conservative, we were like, we don't really know what that is. I don't think that's what we are, but like, we're not sure what it is because we haven't seen any.
Yeah.
So have you seen stats around it? Was it worse for millennials?
Way worse
for
millennials.
30s?
Yeah. And, I don't have the exact stats on Canada, but I also think we've seen a seismic shift in what our communities are defining as conservative now.
Very true.
Traditionally it was the Republican Party in the United States and tax cuts, and that was it. That basically defined you as a conservative. But look at people like your dad, right? All of a sudden saying, hey, actually it's not normal to think that you were born in the wrong body, and we should unpack that a little bit and some of the mental implications of that. That makes you this radical right-wing extremist, which is just crazy. So I think partially it's a changing definition.
Yes.
But I do think, and this was a huge thesis of my book, essentially, every young group of people throughout history always has one thing in common, and that is that they want to rebel against the people who came before them. And historically, in modern America, throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s, you think of the hippie movement and rock and roll and covering your body in tattoos and sticking it to the man, and that was rebellious. That was radical. Now, to be radically countercultural and to be a modern rebel, it's to want to get married and to support Donald Trump and to post conservative videos and repost Jordan Peterson on your Instagram account, which I don't think really anybody could have seen coming in the last 50 years or so. But it's cool and cutting edge and exciting to embrace traditionalism again. So you've watched this huge pendulum swing happen between millennials, who overwhelmingly supported socialism and Marxism, overwhelmingly would say they supported the rewriting of the US Constitution, wanted to pack the courts, said there's no such thing as free speech, essentially, to now looking at these videos of college kids celebrating by the thousands on their college campuses on election night this last time around. You're watching frat bros miss class to hold up the American flag while getting pummeled by protesters in the midst of all of this pro-terrorism stuff. 93% of Gen Zers say they want to get married, according to a recent study published by Newsweek, which is crazy because every voice in society says, don't get married. That's the worst thing you could ever do for yourself in your life, and certainly wasn't a virtue for millennials or a value they upheld. 62% of Gen Zers have already started their own business, and most of these kids are still teenagers. So they're realizing they can be entrepreneurs and CEOs at 16 instead of spending $250,000 on a degree in gender theory basket weaving or something on their college campus. And I think what you're really watching is a group of young people realize, not literally in the sense of a revolution, but culturally in the sense of a revolution, it's up to young people now, because no one else is going to do this, to take back our country and to redefine the American dream when we've been leading the race to the bottom for the last several generations. Somebody has to fix it, and those older than us certainly aren't.
I love that. That's very true. That's very hopeful.
Yeah.
Are all your channels hopeful like that? Or do you,
I like to think I'm an optimist.
That was really nice.
Sometimes I'm not. And, I think a lot of people have very negative things to say about our generation based on a handful of videos they see on TikTok that go viral on Twitter, and that's about it. But I really think this last election cycle has proven so many people wrong, and there's a lot more optimism and hope for young adults than I've seen in a very, very long time, certainly throughout my lifetime in the US right now.
Yeah, well, that's way better. I love that. Okay, what do I have here to ask you? Oh, this is fun. Okay, let's do some like relationship stuff. And that was great though. And I think I totally see that swing happening with young people. That is not like I said, I cannot imagine meeting, not even in my school, but meeting someone who was a conservative when I was in high school. It was like, and a lot of it was counterculture. So what's the most rebellious thing we can do? Which was basically wokeism starting when I was in high school. Not that I was interested in that at all, because if everyone has the same view, it was like,
it's not really rebellious at that point.
Yeah. What about kids? Are people, okay, yeah, let's do that first. Do you know anything about people having kids younger? Like, how old are you?
I'm 27, so this will be my first kid. Literally, like, all of my friends are getting married and having kids right now, which is anecdotal evidence, obviously. It doesn't speak to mass data and polling across our entire country.
Yeah.
But I do think we're going to see a huge pendulum swing in that direction, namely because everybody is screaming at young women in particular do not get married, and never, ever, ever have children. Right before the election, the Los Angeles Times ran a headline where the headline actually said it is almost shameful to want to have children. And they were making the argument for this from the climate change perspective and overpopulation, which is the biggest hoax of all time. We are wildly underpopulated, actually. In over 150 countries in the world, we have a fertility rate less than 2.1. So we actually can't reproduce to fill our own population back up again. But you've seen this narrative everywhere, from podcasts, from influencers, from celebrities, from the entertainment industry. I mean, it's just everywhere. And I think ultimately you're looking at this whole generation of people who have been on the dating apps for years and years and years. They've been engaging in casual hookup culture for years and years and years. They're reading Cosmopolitan magazine headlines that tell them it's super fun to cheat on your husband and that's going to bring the spark back into your marriage. Real headlines, actually.
It'll bring a spark back in.
Something.
I don't know if it's the kind of spark you want. Things are.
We're miserable and depressed and fat on birth control and have no sex drive, and that's becoming incredibly normal. And we're lonely. I mean, literally every mental health problem that our generation is facing is ultimately based in extreme isolation and loneliness, contributing to this anxiety and depression. Interestingly, the CDC said in 2021, 1 in 3 teenage girls in America seriously contemplated taking her own life, which was shocking. Well over 33% of teenage girls. And that bucked the trend from the last several decades, where most of the crises, particularly with mental health, you've been seeing with young women were groupthink mentality. It was cluster suicides and cluster eating disorders, and whole groups of friends would be doing these things. And now it's all based in a profound isolation from one another and loneliness, where an individual says, the world would be better without me. So I think we're kind of returning to our roots, especially as women. And we're very relational, intimate creatures. We're very empathetic to one another. So we naturally seek out relationships with one another. And we're asking, well, what's missing? Largely, what's missing is marriage and parenthood. And we've seen the lowest marriage rate in American history these past few years in the United States since we began recording those rates in the 1860s. And we are facing a 100-year fertility low in the United States in 2024, going into 2025.
Really?
Not because people can't have kids, although that's certainly an alarming problem that we need to face, but because people just are choosing not to have them. And then we look around and say, well, if that's the case and we're all miserable, maybe we're missing something when it comes to traditional values and marriage and family again.
Yeah. Wow. That's nice, though. I know when I had my daughter, I was 20, was it 24 or 25? I was, anyway, late 24, early 25, something like that. And the people in my neighborhood who had kids were 35. Like there was nobody in Toronto that had kids that was under 35. It was like, if you're not in your late 30s, then what are you doing? Where's your career? What have you done with your life? Yeah. Like I got asked, the number of times I got asked with a newborn baby or super pregnant, what is it you do? Like, and it was what is it you do? Like with disgust from, I think, to put it bluntly, childless older women who were angry. It was like, what is it you do? And I was like, well, I'm, about to give birth right now. So that's like what I'm doing right now. Actually. Yeah. But it was pretty brutal. So and then I traveled to other countries, and usually these were not first world countries. And the number of people who were in their mid-20s who had kids and looked happy and there was like more of a community element. There were restaurants. I couldn't believe this. There were restaurants you could go to, and most of the restaurants would have someone there to watch kids or a little daycare room. Wow. And I was like, so there were people hanging out with their kind of little kids running around with their friends, and it was totally normal. And I was like, wow, we're so isolated. It's so isolating. This was like 7 years ago to have a kid. It was like, it just destroys women. They're at home alone with a baby. Like, no wonder everyone's scared about it. But if they weren't isolated, if it wasn't like this one-off person having a kid away from all their extended family with their
friends, and
then it'd be so much better. So it's really nice to hear that there's a swing back. Plus, it makes sense. Community. Like otherwise, women don't have kids, and that's
that's exactly what we saw with millennials. Actually, I read something the other day that 70% of millennials in a recent survey said they would rather have pets than kids because it's easier. It doesn't ruin their lifestyle. It doesn't ruin their corporate aspirations.
That's what we were taught. Like,
and that was easier. Yeah.
We
Which
were
is
taught
so
that
sad.
from celebrities too. And I think now you're seeing a little bit more of the like Hollywood celebrity having children.
Yep.
Which
a
is
huge
nice.
baby boom this last year.
Nobody had kids when I was a teenager. And I'm talking about like 35-year-olds. Now they are.
Yeah.
Like you see some people who are like, it's like, oh, they're having a baby. How old are they? 42. I was like, okay. So we just like skipped the millennials.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, I always found that so demeaning, especially now that I'm pregnant, I'm working full time and I'm traveling a lot still for my job and everything. Yeah, it hasn't been easy. And there are some days that it's really, really hard. But I always found it so ironically anti-feminist.
Oh yeah.
This message that we're telling women that your whole career will die. You'll never get a promotion. You'll never have friends. You'll never go on a vacation ever again if you have children, to the point that a lot of these large Fortune 500 companies would literally rather pay out of pocket for you to go to another state to get an abortion than to give you better maternity leave, for example. Always blew my mind. I genuinely could never wrap my head around something like that, because literally you're just telling women you're not good enough. You're not capable of this. Your life is over the minute you decide to bring more love and more purpose and a worth
so true.
to your identity. You're just a worker bee. You're a salary to us. And make no mistake, they would replace you tomorrow if something happened or you died or whatever. You're literally just a number to them. But we call that empowerment and feminism. That's always baffled me.
That's so funny. I hadn't thought about that specifically, but definitely growing up, what I learned was, now luckily I had my dad as a dad. So I had some mixed messages there, because it was like, marriage is super important. You should have kids young, but also you need a PhD. And I remember being 17, being like, how many years does it take
That's a lot.
to get a PhD? And then, but I'm supposed to have a baby young. And then how does this work? Anyway, it worked out. I don't have a PhD, but it worked out anyway. So at least I had my dad being like, no, kids are good. Kids are good. Kids are good. But, and then my friends that would come over, he'd tell them that too. Not that he was sitting everyone down being like, have children. But
yeah, what was that like bringing friends home to your dad and him talking about that stuff?
I think, so it depended on the friend. If it was like, I went to a public school, some of my friends were in trouble. So if it was a troubled friend, then it was a stern talking to. It was really only close friends that got the like, what are you doing with your life? What's your plan? Like, when are you going to get married? This kind of conversation. So that didn't happen to very many people around. It definitely happened to my best friend, because she was around all the time, and we like got into hordes of trouble and things. So he'd sit us down all the time and be like, what are you doing with your life? What's your plan? You know, this woke stuff's bad. She was like, my best friend was at Concordia and she was in sociology, but it was sociology with a minor in gender studies, something like that. I'm telling you, I was in the trenches.
Yeah.
I was in psychology, but everyone I knew was in gender studies.
Ugh.
And I just remember we didn't get along very well, to be blunt, because I was just like, this is so infuriatingly stupid. Like, you can't just use all these manipulative sentences to describe an idea to me without the underlying being stupid. Like, you can't just cover it in word salad and be like, it's smart. That's not what makes something smart.
No.
Yeah. So anyway, I left that university because I was just like, if I hear more of this, I'm going to hit somebody. Like, I got to get out of here. But she survived that.
Wow.
She failed a class. I hope she's okay with me talking about this. I won't name her though. But she failed a class called Men and Masculinity.
Oh no.
Because the professor wanted her to write an essay that was basically like why men and masculinity is bad. And she didn't want to write it because she has a good relationship with her dad and things, and like wasn't anti-man. So she wrote an argument to it.
Which
and
is smart. It's academia, right?
Yeah,
You'd think.
They failed her. So she went to the person above the professor and said, hey, I wrote this, like, I'm handing it in. What's going on? But they failed her anyway. That was the only class that she failed, was Men and Masculinity, for writing an essay that wasn't anti-man.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, I like left Montreal after that. I was like, this is so... I can't believe they're charging me money for this. Like, how dare they charge me money for this? And nobody around me, there were maybe one or two people that were like, yeah, you know, Mikhaila, argue on Facebook with these people. But they're like, there wasn't a group. There weren't conservatives. It was just entrenched. It was like, guess I'll go to the sciences because it's not as bad there.
Yeah. It wasn't at the time anyway. You know, I love that story because I feel like there are probably students on every college campus in the West that could tell you exactly the same story about that paper. And people wonder why young men gave the middle finger to the left and said, yeah, we're not subscribing to this anymore. Everybody's shocked and amazed by that. And I'm thinking, you've spent the last decade trying to program like a robot every single person under the age of 45 to think men evil, eat all men. And now you're surprised that the next group of young men is saying, we don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I know. It's a direct response. Also, do people not know that when politics get extreme or when ideologies get extreme, it swings to the other side? Don't people learn this in history? I'm always shocked when they're like, oh no, it's going to keep going that way. And it's like, has it ever stayed? Now, sometimes it'll get stuck on one side for longer, which I was, obviously extremely worried about. Mm-hmm. It turned around. I'm still shocked that Trump won. I was like, he's going to win. Like, I think he's going to win, but I didn't know he was going to win. I was
you didn't want to let yourself believe it.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know. There's still a lot of people I'm not seeing in like New York and California that don't think the way I think at all. And so we'll see. But if you think about it, it was like, you saw kind of whispers of it. At least I did in Canada in like 2012, 2013. Then I had to switch. 2014, 2015 was worse. And then dad kind of got booted from the university basically 2016, 2017. That period of time till now, 2024, a lot of bad things have happened in the meantime.
Tons.
But it didn't take too long. I thought it was going to take longer than that.
I did too, actually. And I was incredibly worried about what the next round of 4 years or 8 years or whatever would look like. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
I honestly wondered if we would have the chance to fight back at all, especially if our legal system changed so substantially.
Definitely.
I mean, Kamala Harris was actually threatening to prosecute you and throw you in prison if you criticized the government on social media. And we tried to be outspoken about this.
UK.
Nobody really paid any attention to that because it didn't get any media coverage.
I didn't see that.
It was awful. I mean, truly insane. And so I was shaking in my boots a little bit. I was hopeful President Trump would win again. And I was seeing this movement happen, particularly with young people. But I didn't want to let myself believe it until election night, which was a fantastic night. It was fantastic. But I think the work really has just begun. And I think that's the message people need to be reminded of for this. A victory for the White House, a victory for Congress, passing great legislation and getting good nominations in for the cabinet. That's fantastic. Those are all wonderful things that we should be excited about and celebrating. But we are fighting a much larger cultural war, I think, right now when it comes to the soul of Western civilization. And a lot of that is going to turn into religious, spiritual warfare in the next several years. A lot of that has to return to our roots of the family and how we educate the next generation of children. That's not going to be spearheaded by the government and by this presidential administration. It has to be ordinary people. The food that we're eating, right? Changing the responsibility we have for our own personal health. All of these things have to start at home. And that's the message I really hope people take away from this last election.
Great. Yeah, I agree. There's only so much the government can do.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, like Trump's getting in there. Everybody who works in the White House is still like the people who don't like him can easily just slow things down they're like, he'll be out in 4 years. Let's just slow things down. Like it's very promising. I think the administration is very promising, but you're still dealing with a lot of red tape. And I know they're trying to cut through it with like Doge and these things, but it's still the government. And it is a lot faster to just start at home.
Yeah.
Speaking of at home, what are you going to do unless things rapidly turn around school-wise? Are you going to homeschool, do you think?
Yes. Yep. My husband and I have talked about this repeatedly, even before we knew we were pregnant, after our wedding, that we were very passionate about homeschooling our children. And a lot of that comes from horror stories I'm hearing from my friends with kids slightly older then our baby will be not just about public schools, but about private schools and even religious schools in America too. You would be shocked how deep the rot has gotten in the American education system. I'm watching families with young children fight about gender ideology and furries and litter boxes in their classroom. Christian schools even, which is crazy. I have no time for that. Also, our lifestyle, me being a full-time content creator and having to travel quite a bit for podcast interviews and stuff like that, I think it'll be really cool to incorporate a more hands-on experiential learning environment for our kids, and we can take off and go somewhere for a week and learn about something on the ground versus in a textbook. And I think that'll be really important for us moving forward. But homeschool is definitely the plan for sure, and is at its highest level of popularity ever in America right now. So the resources that exist out there are endless. Truly anybody can homeschool their children now. My dad and I were talking about this a few months ago when he was driving me to something in Colorado. He said, when you guys were little and young, we thought about maybe homeschooling. Yeah. We knew one family who homeschooled, and that was it. And it was very weird at the time when you guys were little. But we kind of bought into this lie that everybody told us as parents, you are too stupid to educate your kids. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to mess them up. Even though you guys are educated attorneys, you're very smart people, you're very educated, nice, wonderful, well-intentioned parents, you're going to mess your children up because you're not certified to be a teacher. You're not prepared to be a teacher. What a powerful lie that has led to mass indoctrination of our kids, that parents shouldn't be involved in the education of their children.
Yeah, completely. I had the conversation with my parents because they used to pull me out sometimes. And I just figured out what it was. I actually asked, so I didn't figure it out. But I was like, why were we missing school sometimes? It'd just be like a week. We'd get like, we're going to homeschool this week. Like, fantastic. Please don't put me back in that. Yeah. And it was either the anti-bullying week, which was when you were taught that you should feel sorry for bullies. So I think we got pulled out during that. We got pulled out during like exams from the government. He was like, you don't need to do those.
Good I don't for even your know parents.
And pulled out during anything that was LGBT at the time. There was just like pull out for that week. So I didn't know what I was even getting pulled out for because I was young. But that's funny. But I was like, why didn't my parents homeschool? My dad was working all the time, so he's too busy. But I was like, why didn't my mom homeschool? Because I don't think they fell into the trap of thinking parent or teachers were more equipped, because that is not how they talked about it at home. Like, I remember I had one teacher that said library in February when I was in grade 4. And I was just like, I don't know what was with me in grade 4. I was like, if I hear library again, I'm gonna lose it. So I don't think that was it. I think it was like maybe a time thing, or maybe they were like, just read whatever you want to read. You're going to be fine.
You'll fill
Plus
in
the
gaps.
Ideology wasn't as entrenched in the school system. So it's not like it was a place to go that wasn't at home, where you kind of learned some things that probably weren't that useful, but you weren't being actively damaged.
Right. And that's the difference now between when we were little and this group of children. It is just crazy. I also think most people thought you would be socially ill-adjusted
100%.
if you were homeschooled growing up, which is so ironic, because now I think if you are homeschooled, you're much more prepared to equip yourself for the real world. You're watching homeschool families put their kids in activities and sports and doing internships and hands-on opportunities at work with mom and dad. And I think those kids are so much more well-adjusted for reality versus having to sit chained to their desk from 8 to 3 every single day, sometimes still with masks on, which is mind-blowing to me.
I think the part that concerns me too, other than the ideology that's being taught, because I think that'll slowly switch. It's not going to switch anytime soon, but eventually they'll have to get rid of it. It's so ridiculous. I'm hoping it'll take
fingers crossed.
It'll take a while. But also, if you put your kid in a school, say a private school, public school, could be a private school maybe, but I think public schools have it worse. And all it is just a group of people from where you are. It's like everyone from where you are. You meet some sketchy people that you would never associate with as an adult. So I remember going to school and I saw crazy things, like an art school in downtown Toronto, crazy things. I was like, that was 100% not appropriate at all in any way. And at the time I remember being like, that's crazy, but at least I'm aware it exists. So it's kind of like gets rid of some maybe naivete that you can pick up.
Yeah, that's true.
But then again, maybe it's better to tell people that exists so that they're not naive, but you don't have to like put your
subscribe
kid in
to
the
it.
midst of it. Like that actually gets dangerous.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about this related to social media and screen time
Yeah.
with teenagers and how do you navigate that. My friends who have kids that are like late tweens, early teens, they're trying to figure out what to do about their kids wanting an Instagram and wanting a TikTok and texting their friends. And I tend to err on the side of exposure, which is a bit controversial in the social media conservative space, especially. But your kids are going to be exposed to this at some point or another, one way or another, by the time they move out when they're 18, or from their friends, when they're hanging out with their friends as teenagers. I think parents often forget their guiding responsibility in shaping the values of their children because they think they can just put this off longer and longer and longer, and it's eventually something they'll talk about with their kids. And that's how we saw an entire generation of 18-year-olds be dropped off for college knowing nothing about politics and religion, knowing nothing about their personal values, and becoming so wildly indoctrinated by their men and masculinity professor telling you all men are evil and all of the other crazy lies in the university system. I think that really destroyed millennials because parents forgot, hey, I'm actually responsible for shaping the mind and the values and the deep-seated opinions of my child. I need to take on an active role in that. So whether it's social media or texting or TV or whatever, a responsible amount of exposure to this stuff, explaining to your child, this is not what we believe in, this is not what we do, but this stuff is out there, to at least have some awareness of what's out there in the world, especially with all of the gender confusion confronting kids these days, I think is a huge responsibility. And I wish more parents took on an active role in that. I think we're seeing a more active role being taken on and a pendulum shift there, but that's just going to determine the next generation's set of values for sure.
I actually do agree with that. So there's a difference between letting your kid roam social media or YouTube by themselves and just to see what's out there, what the algorithm like pushes at them. That's different, but completely taking it away. I agree. It was like, what's going to happen? This actually happened. I know people who were working for Google or working for some of these big tech companies, and none of their kids were allowed to use iPads or anything. It was this big thing. It was like, they're like, yeah, no. They need the outdoors. They need fresh air. They're in these schools. They're like Waldorf or something like that. They learn how to cook. It was very like old school in a good way, but it was like no exposure. I was like, are your kids going to know how to type? Like you kind of know how to need to know how to use a computer nowadays. Like, and if you don't know the benefits and the cons of social media and these platforms, you're going to be behind.
Yeah,
like
it's true.
I definitely agree. It's better to show what people do and also how you can get conned on there and like, hey, this is super edited. This isn't real. Like, beware of this because it's going to be everywhere and it's not real and everyone knows it's not real. You know, that kind of thing. It's way better than, no, just avoid computers and then welcome to university and the internet at the same time.
You know, I think kids are a lot smarter than adults give them credit for, especially
maybe
teenagers. People forget. Everybody assumes teenagers are idiots and everything that they believe is wrong and they're going to be the most gullible people that fall for anything. And that can be true, obviously. I don't want to negate the possibility of that being a reality. But teenagers, you know, saved the world multiple times over throughout human history. We forget that our founding fathers were not these ancient, shriveled up, old, white, decrepit men that had these horrible intentions for the future of society and were so unbelievably narcissistic. Ironically, that is our government right now. So I think we maybe need to look in the mirror when we criticize our past. But our founding fathers were 18, 19, 20 years old. These were young, energetic punk rock individuals sticking it to the man, so to speak, the most powerful entity on the face of the planet, who were so forward thinking and radical and educated in ways that I think people forget about now. We're watching a revolution happen now, not with arms, but with ideas. And you're watching young people spearhead that direction largely because of social media and the conversations people like your dad and Charlie Kirk and all of these incredible people have been having with the youth for the last 5 to 10 years we wouldn't be having this conversation about an optimistic trajectory of America moving forward if it weren't for Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. And I think sometimes this overcorrection we're seeing from the conservative movement to just cut out everything related to the digital world for the next generation of kids would be a mistake, because we still have work to do every single day to make sure these ideas get handed down to the next generation and the next generation. That doesn't happen with the Federalist Papers and standing on an apple crate on the sidewalk anymore. That happens on Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. It's better to learn how to use the tools and get the benefits from them.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely benefits from them. I mean, I wouldn't have part of the jobs like the podcast or whatever without it. And luckily, I think my age, I think I was actually in a pretty good time frame because I didn't get a phone. I was a little bit late to having a phone because my parents wouldn't buy me one. So I had to earn one. So that took a little bit longer. But I think I was like 15. I wasn't really on Facebook till I was like 16 or 17. And so it didn't hit like me as a 14-year-old when I think it would have been really hard. Like I had Messenger and that was chaotic enough as a 14-year-old without having an Instagram account.
Yep.
So I think like age-wise, it was pretty good. Like wasn't left behind from social media, but it wasn't just brainwashing at a young age. Like I spent most of my childhood outside playing on the street. So I like just dodged it. So if you can get a bit of both, but if people are having kids younger too, then that should revive itself, because kids, like if they have the option to play with other kids, now if they can play with other kids in an iPad, that might be
that might be what they, but you
can take that away. But I think people like kids like playing with each other.
Yeah,
so if you can just set that up because people are having more kids, that should maybe hopefully take care of itself.
And parents, play with your kids, like take on an active role with them. Every time we go out to dinner now, me and my husband take note of families with little kids because we're just curious what people are doing. 9 times out of 10, at least, kids are holding mom's phone this close to their face, or they're all on the individual iPads watching something else at a restaurant, not communicating with their siblings, let alone their parents or anybody else who might be at this dinner. And I think that's really, really damaging to a child's mind. Kids, again, are a lot smarter than you give them credit for. My parents had this rule when we were little: no kids table at family gatherings or big extended family holidays. We were expected to sit with the adults and talk to the adults about what was going on in the world and who's running for president and what's going on in the news. And sometimes that was really boring and you roll your eyes as a kid and think, ugh, I do not want to talk about this. But in retrospect, I'm so grateful that my parents gave us an opportunity and the benefit of the doubt that we could hold our own in a conversation with other people who were far older than us. And I wonder sometimes what it would be like if every kid had exposure to that earlier and earlier and could make up their mind and challenge their own opinions and challenge the status quo so much younger in life.
We had my experience with going out for dinners with my parents, which we did sometimes, was if we were going to be, we got in like huge amounts of trouble if we were bad, even a little bit. Like my dad was pretty strict. So there was this one time, many times actually, but it was mostly my brother that was the problem causer at dinner. But it'd be like, you're going to be bad. You can stand outside. Oof. So that, and this is like a pretty little kid. And we're like, go stand outside. You can come in when you're better. And so he'd be like standing outside and dad would go out and talk to him and things. But there wasn't like, we weren't allowed to be bad. So there wasn't the option to be bad. So we did go out and it was fine. I have no problem with my 7-year-old too. I think because I've gone out with her so many times. So it was like, coloring pad, there you go. So you can only come if you're not going to be annoying. Otherwise we'll get a babysitter. So you can't be annoying. And that's like, now she's old enough that worked. But when she was little, it really wasn't a problem if there were like some
just
coloring
give
pads
them the
around.
challenge.
She
Kids
was
love
easy.
rising to the challenge.
She was easy
for that.
though. This new kid I have, George, this 1-year-old, I'm like, it's going to be tricky taking him to a restaurant. He's like whipping forks. I was like,
he's a
too
boy's
little.
boy. Yeah.
You're too little to, I was like, no, don't throw a fork in my eye. Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. But I am really encouraged to see parents get more excited about parenting again, especially wanting to have kids, wanting to have more kids, wanting to get married. You're kind of watching this revival of the family. And I think a lot of that runs in tandem with the religious revival that we're seeing in America today,
Definitely.
because that goes part and parcel with the design for humanity. You know, God did not design us to live in isolation and to have our careers be the only part of our identity. We were designed for intimate relationships with one another forever and to build families. And I think people have been missing that for so long. But as we're going back to church on Sunday morning, it makes us think about and wonder about what our purpose is and what our vocation is for families too.
Yeah, definitely. I think it also helps with the sacrificial element of having kids, because especially as a woman, I mean, I can't speak from the man's perspective, but there is a sacrifice that goes into pregnancy, and like the toll it takes and the emotions that you have to deal with, especially if you're not a particularly emotional woman, and then you're just like, ugh. Do some people feel like this all the time? Like, oh my gosh, there's like, it's way easier for me now than it was before. Because otherwise, I mean, I still have like, I'm still pregnant, so there's still some things to deal with. But having faith is so important to that there's something bigger than you, that it's not all about you in the moment, which is huge. You've been wording it way better than me, because I'm like a pregnancy fog. But it's really helpful for people. Hopefully it keeps spreading and people understand what it can do to like relieve some of the burden that just life puts on you from, I don't know how hard it is. Right?
Because it's hard.
It's hard.
I think there's a tendency sometimes to gloss over the hard part, especially on social media, and everything you post be amazing, amazing, amazing. This whole thing has been fantastic. No, pregnancy is really hard. Every day you look in the mirror and your body looks different than yesterday, and you don't recognize what you look like. And that can either be really cool and beautiful and you marvel at that, or some days you're thinking, I'm enormous. I'm so big. I can't even begin to wrap my head around this. The mood swings are crazy. You lie awake at night in the middle of the night because you can't sleep and your kid's kicking you, and you're thinking about when they get here, and are you even going to be prepared? Are you going to mess this kid up? Men could never do this. I stand by this. Every day I look at my husband and say, you should just be very thankful that I'm doing this and not you. Because there's just
I've done that too.
an overwhelming emotional intimacy aspect of this from an empathetic woman's perspective that is so unique to womanhood. And I've spent a lot of time this pregnancy thinking about Mary, actually, and what it was like for her to carry God into the world, because she is the perfect archetype of self-sacrifice, quite literally. I mean, giving every single part of herself for service to God. And I'm sure she was laying awake in the middle of the night many nights, right after they gave birth. This girl was moving to Egypt. She had very difficult struggles in her path. And yet she just remained so beautifully humble about the whole thing, that she was part of a much larger design for God's plan for humanity. And I think we all can find solace and comfort in that, because no matter what you see on social media, no matter what you've heard about the most wonderful pregnancies throughout history and the most amazing, badass, incredible women, it's hard. It's really hard for all of us, but you find such beauty in that self-sacrifice to give back to other people, be it your child or your family or society at large. The world would not be what it is without moms, amazing moms.
You also don't look back as a woman. You don't look back on pregnancy and remember that how hard it is, because it is hard. But you don't remember that. You just know, assuming everything goes well, that you have a kid. It doesn't matter in the end that there's some suffering involved.
No, in fact, moms would tell you they'd do it a million times over and over and over again, which is so beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, Isabel, where can people find you online if they want to find you?
You can follow me across all social media platforms at The Isabel Brown, and look up The Isabel Brown Show on YouTube, Rumble, or anywhere else you watch videos.
Well, that was fun. Thank you very much for coming on, and good luck with everything.
Thank you. I can't wait for our daughters to meet sometime very soon, which is a blast, and best of luck with your family. Congratulations on everything, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you.